Germans were stunned when Americans downed 70 aircraft in just 15 minutes. March 6, 1944, somewhere over Berlin, Germany. The sky erupted in flames as American Mustangs tore through Luftwaffe formations like wolves through sheep. What the Germans witnessed that day wasn't just a battle. It was the complete collapse of their air superiority in a quarter hour of pure devastation. But here's what they didn't know. Those 15 minutes weren't luck or superior piloting alone. They were the result of an industrial machine so powerful, so relentless, that it was producing aircraft faster than Germany could train pilots to fly them. While German mechanics scavenged parts from wrecks, American factories were rolling out brand new fighters every 55 minutes. The real question isn't how America downed 70 planes in 15 minutes. It's how a democratic nation's assembly lines became the most devastating weapon of World War II. What happens when unlimited production meets unlimited determination? Before we get into this story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Dawn broke over the Rhine Valley with a thin layer of mist curling through shattered trees. The acrid smell of high-octane fuel mixed with morning frost as engines coughed to life across German airfields. At Bonn Air Base, Major Adolf Galland paced between the scattered remnants of his once proud Luftwaffe squadrons, his leather flight gloves tight against the cold aluminum skin of a Focke-Wulf 190. The numbers told a story of gradual strangulation. By early 1944, the United States was producing more than 96,000 aircraft annually, outbuilding Germany nearly 5-1. Every lost Messerschmitt or Focke-Wulf represented an irreplaceable piece of German air power, while American factories delivered replacement aircraft faster than the Reich could train pilots to fly them. Galland's morning reports painted a picture of systematic erosion. Pilot training had fallen from 240 hours before the war to fewer than 110, leaving young men with barely enough experience to take off, let alone engage hardened American veterans. The sound of engines warming on the tarmac carried an undertone of desperation. These pilots knew they were flying into skies dominated by an enemy with unlimited resources. German aircraft engineer Willy Messerschmitt struggled with impossible demands, trying to innovate jet fighters while Allied bombs fell on his factories. Raw materials grew scarce as blockades tightened and transportation networks crumbled under constant attack. Each morning brought fresh reports of damaged production facilities and scattered workforces. The smell of smoke rising from distant fires served as a constant reminder of Allied bombing campaigns. Oil refineries burned, reducing aviation fuel production by 80% from peak levels. The mathematics of attrition were simple and brutal. America could afford losses that would cripple German operations permanently. Galland examined his depleted squadrons with the eye of a professional soldier who understood the inevitable. Empty hangars outnumbered occupied ones. Maintenance crews cannibalized crashed aircraft for spare parts that could no longer be manufactured. The steady rhythm of Allied bomber formations passing overhead had become as regular as the sunrise. In the distance, radar operators reported incoming formations, American bombers escorted by long-range fighters that could now reach deep into German territory. The escorts carried drop tanks that extended their range beyond Berlin, eliminating the safe zones that had once protected German aircraft factories and training facilities. The silence between engine tests was filled with the weight of approaching history. Galland knew that each takeoff might be a pilot's last. Not because German aviators lacked courage, but because they lacked everything else: fuel, ammunition, replacement aircraft, and time to train properly. They were coming again, and this time the Reich had almost nothing left to give. Across the Atlantic Ocean, in a sprawling factory complex on Long Island, New York, Sergeant Mary Doyle wiped aluminum dust from her hands as the metallic tang of industrial production filled her nostrils. The constant rhythm of rivet guns echoed through Republic Aviation's assembly hall, their pneumatic hammering punctuated by the hiss of compressed air and the clatter of conveyor belts moving aircraft sections toward final assembly. The factory floor stretched for nearly a mile, filled with the skeletal frames of P-47 Thunderbolts in various stages of completion. Sparks flew from welding stations as workers in coveralls and safety goggles shaped raw aluminum into instruments of war. The air carried the sharp smell of heated metal, machine oil, and the sweat of round-the-clock production shifts. Every 55 minutes, another thunderbolt rolled off the assembly line, a rate of production that German factories could not match even under peacetime conditions. By 1944, Republic Aviation had delivered over 15,600 P-47s, each one equipped with 850 caliber machine guns and capable of carrying 2,000 pounds of bombs or rockets. Doyle paused at her station, watching a riveting team install armor plating behind the pilot's seat. Each rivet represented a small act of protection for some unknown airman who would soon fly over European battlefields. The precision required was absolute. Structural failure at 25,000 feet meant certain death for the pilot and loss of $1 million aircraft. The factory operated 24 hours daily, with 3 complete shifts cycling through identical routines. Women comprised 40% of the workforce, taking over traditionally male roles as millions of men deployed overseas. Their steady hands assembled intricate engine components, wired complex electrical systems, and tested hydraulic controls that would operate flawlessly under combat conditions. Meanwhile, German aircraft production struggled under constant Allied bombing. Messerschmitt factories operating at reduced capacity could barely maintain existing aircraft, let alone expand production to match American output. Raw materials arrived sporadically, skilled workers were conscripted for military service, and electrical power became unreliable as Allied raids targeted infrastructure. The contrast in production capability was staggering. American factories consumed unlimited quantities of aluminum, steel, rubber, and electronics, while German manufacturers rationed every component. Quality control in American plants maintained strict standards, while German production increasingly relied on forced labor and improvised materials. Doyle's supervisor checked the daily production figures against targets set by the War Production Board. The numbers consistently exceeded expectations as American industry transformed from peacetime manufacturing to the most efficient military production system in human history. Each aircraft represented not just industrial capacity, but national determination translated into tangible military advantage. The sound of aircraft engines being tested outside the factory provided constant background noise. Test pilots put each Thunderbolt through rigorous performance checks before signing acceptance papers that would send the aircraft to training bases or directly to overseas deployment. Quality and quantity merged into an unstoppable combination. As her shift ended, Doyle looked across the assembly floor at hundreds of workers maintaining the relentless pace of production. Their efforts would soon translate into American air superiority over Europe, each rivet and weld contributing to the overwhelming force that would dominate enemy skies. Every rivet tightened. In New York meant one more pilot would fly over Europe. Tomorrow, in the English countryside near Suffolk, Captain Don Gentile sat in the cockpit of his P-51 Mustang Shangri-La, listening to the Merlin engine's distinctive roar as it warmed to operating temperature. Morning dew sparkled on the aircraft's polished aluminum skin, while sunlight reflected off the propeller's spinning blades. The familiar vibration of 1,200 horsepower transmitted through the airframe, a sensation that had become as natural as breathing. The briefing room at Debden Airfield had been filled with tension as intelligence officers outlined the morning's mission. Escort duty for bomber formations targeting German aircraft factories deep inside enemy territory. Maps covered with red pins showed known Luftwaffe airfields, each one a potential source of intercepting fighters armed with cannon and machine guns. Gentile's P-51 carried 6 50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns with 1,800 rounds of ammunition, enough firepower to destroy any German fighter in seconds of concentrated fire. The Mustang's maximum speed of 437 miles per hour gave it a decisive advantage over most enemy aircraft, while its range of over 1,600 miles with drop tanks allowed deep penetration into German airspace. The 4th Fighter Group had earned its reputation through months of combat over occupied Europe, with pilots accumulating hundreds of hours of experience in aerial warfare. Their training programs back in the United States had provided over 300 hours of flight instruction, compared to German pilots who now received fewer than 100 hours before being thrust into combat situations. Fellow pilots from the squadron gathered around their aircraft, conducting final pre-flight inspections and discussing tactical formations. The camaraderie was evident in their quiet conversations and shared understanding of the dangers ahead. Each man knew that American industrial capacity had provided them with the finest fighter aircraft in the world, maintained by skilled ground crews with unlimited access to spare parts and support equipment. Intelligence reports indicated that German fighter opposition had been declining steadily as fuel shortages and pilot casualties mounted. Luftwaffe units that once fielded 50 aircraft per squadron now operated with fewer than 20, and those were often flown by inexperienced pilots barely capable of basic flight maneuvers, let alone sophisticated combat tactics. The contrast between American abundance and German scarcity was visible in every aspect of the mission. American bombers flew in formations of hundreds, protected by fighter escorts that could be replaced immediately if lost. German defenders struggled to assemble even small groups of interceptors, their efforts hampered by fuel rationing and mechanical breakdowns. Gentile adjusted his oxygen mask and checked his radio equipment, listening to the steady chatter of control tower communications, coordinating the massive aerial armada preparing for departure. The scale of the operation reflected American logistical capabilities that German planners could barely comprehend. Thousands of aircraft, tens of thousands of personnel, and unlimited supplies moving in precise coordination. The sound of bomber engines grew louder as formations of B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators passed overhead, their 4-engine drone filling the sky with purposeful thunder. Each bomber carried several tons of high explosives targeted at German production facilities, continuing the systematic destruction of enemy industrial capacity. As the mission time approached, Gentile felt the familiar mixture of anticipation and confidence that came from knowing he flew the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world, supported by the most powerful industrial nation in human history. Soon, the sky would be thick with wings, and the test of everything America had built would come, 25,000 feet above Berlin. The sky erupted in controlled chaos as Captain Don Gentile rolled his P-51 Mustang into a diving attack against a formation of Focke-Wulf 190s. The roar of his Merlin engine mixed with the sharp crack of cannon fire as German fighters scattered under the coordinated assault of American escorts. Tracer rounds streaked through the thin air like deadly fireworks, marking the paths of destruction across the blue canvas of high-altitude combat. Gentile pressed his trigger, sending 6 streams of 50-caliber bullets into the engine compartment of a Focke-Wulf that had turned too slowly to avoid his attack. The German aircraft shuddered under the impact, pieces of cowling and wing sections spinning away as hydraulic fluid and oil sprayed across the sky. Within seconds, the fighter was falling earthward, trailing black smoke and orange flames. The tactical situation unfolded with mathematical precision. American fighters had achieved numerical superiority through overwhelming production capacity and strategic planning. Where German formations might field 20 aircraft, American escorts arrived with 60 or 80 fighters, each piloted by thoroughly trained aviators with hundreds of hours of experience in modern aircraft. Radio communications crackled with reports of successive kills as the massacre continued. "Bandit going down at 2 o'clock. Good hit on the 190 breaking left." The professional calm in American voices contrasted sharply with the increasingly desperate German radio chatter as Luftwaffe pilots reported catastrophic losses and called for immediate reinforcement. That would never arrive. The 15-minute engagement demonstrated the overwhelming advantage of American industrial capacity, translated into tactical superiority. German pilots, many with fewer than 100 hours of total flight time, faced American veterans who had been flying combat missions for months or years. The difference in experience was immediately apparent in their maneuvering, gunnery accuracy, and tactical decision-making under pressure. Luftwaffe. Oberst Adolf Galland would later describe receiving the initial reports of the engagement with disbelief. 70 aircraft destroyed in 15 minutes represented more than many German factories could produce in an entire month. The rate of attrition made replacement impossible. Even if adequate numbers of trained pilots had been available, American fighters employed coordinated tactics developed through extensive training and refined by combat experience. High-low formations allowed simultaneous attacks from multiple angles, while superior radio communication enabled real-time coordination that German pilots could not match. The P-51's superior speed and range meant that German fighters could neither escape nor pursue effectively. The mechanical reliability of American aircraft proved decisive during extended combat. While German fighters suffered engine failures and equipment malfunctions due to material shortages and rushed production, American Mustangs performed flawlessly throughout the engagement. Quality control in American factories ensured that every component met rigid specifications, translating into consistent performance under combat stress. As the engagement concluded, surviving German aircraft fled toward their home bases, leaving the sky littered with falling debris and parachutes. American bomber formations continued their approach to targets deep inside Germany, protected by fighter escorts that had demonstrated absolute aerial supremacy through overwhelming force and superior equipment. The 15 minutes over Berlin marked more than just a tactical victory. It represented the complete collapse of German air defense capability under the weight of American industrial might. For the Germans, it was not a battle. It was a collapse in real time. Major Adolf Galland received the catastrophic reports in his underground command bunker near Berlin, the concrete walls unable to muffle the distant rumble of Allied bomber formations passing overhead. The fluorescent lights flickered as nearby anti-aircraft batteries fired uselessly at formations flying beyond their effective range. The air in the bunker carried the acrid smell of cigarette, smoke, and nervous sweat as communications. Officers delivered increasingly desperate situation reports from scattered Luftwaffe units. The numbers were staggering and undeniable. 70 aircraft destroyed in 15 minutes of combat represented more fighters than some entire Luftwaffe wings possessed. The casualty reports read like a complete organizational breakdown. Experienced squadron leaders killed, irreplaceable aircraft destroyed, and surviving pilots reporting ammunition exhaustion and fuel shortages that prevented effective engagement. Galland studied the tactical analysis with the professional detachment of a career military officer who understood that this was not a temporary setback but evidence of systemic collapse. German pilot training programs could no longer provide adequate preparation for modern air combat, where American pilots received over 300 hours of instruction in advanced aircraft. German trainees were rushed into combat with barely enough experience to manage basic flight operations. The mathematics of attrition were brutal and simple. Germany was losing over 1,000 fighter aircraft per month, while American factories produced replacements at 5 times that rate. Each German loss was irreplaceable. Each American loss was immediately compensated by new production, flowing from factories that operated beyond the reach of Luftwaffe retaliation intelligence. Reports confirmed that American escort fighters now possessed the range to accompany bomber formations to any target within German territory. The drop tank technology that extended P-51 range to over 1,600 miles had eliminated the defensive advantage that German fighters once enjoyed by attacking bombers beyond escort range. No target remained safe from coordinated Allied assault. The quality gap between American and German equipment had become equally decisive. American aircraft incorporated advanced metallurgy, precision manufacturing, and sophisticated electronic systems that German industry could no longer match. Material shortages forced German manufacturers to use inferior alloys and improvised components. that reduced aircraft performance and reliability under combat. Conditions to Galland's staff officers presented fuel consumption, reports that painted an equally grim picture. Aviation gasoline production had fallen to less than 20% of peak levels as Allied bombing systematically destroyed refineries and transportation infrastructure. Aircraft that might survive combat encounters were grounded for lack of fuel to reach operational areas. The pilot replacement crisis had reached critical proportions. Experienced instructors were being transferred to combat units to fill immediate needs, leaving flight training programs understaffed and inadequately equipped. The few pilots who completed abbreviated training programs were killed or captured within weeks of assignment to operational squadrons. Radio intercepts revealed the scale of American logistical support that made sustained operations possible. Supply convoys crossing the Atlantic delivered unlimited quantities of ammunition, spare parts, fuel, and replacement aircraft. American airfields in England functioned like massive industrial complexes, with maintenance capabilities that could rebuild damaged aircraft overnight. The strategic implications were inescapable. The Luftwaffe had lost the war of industrial production before the first shot was fired in anger. German aviation industry, even operating at maximum theoretical capacity, could never match American output supported by unlimited raw materials and advanced manufacturing techniques. As evening approached, Galland reviewed the day's losses against available replacements. The arithmetic was simple and devastating. Sustainable attrition rates had been exceeded by factors of 10 or 20. Galland knew the sky was no longer Germany's. It belonged to America. Back across the Atlantic in Long Island, New York, the Republic Aviation Factory operated at maximum capacity as the second shift took over from the day workers. Mary Doyle supervised a riveting team installing armor plating on P-47 Thunderbolt fuselages, the pneumatic hammering of their tools creating a constant metallic rhythm that echoed through the mile-long assembly hall. The air was thick with aluminum, dust, and the sharp smell of heated metal as welding stations operated continuously to meet production quotas. The factory floor was a symphony of industrial precision. Overhead cranes moved aircraft sections between workstations, while conveyor belts carried smaller components toward final assembly areas. Quality control inspectors examined every joint and rivet, ensuring that American aircraft would perform flawlessly under the extreme conditions of high-altitude combat over Europe. Production statistics posted daily on bulletin boards told the story of American industrial supremacy in numbers that German planners could barely comprehend. Republic Aviation alone was producing one P-47 Thunderbolt every 55 minutes, while similar factories across the nation maintained comparable rates for different aircraft types. The combined output represented more fighters per month than Germany had produced during the entire first year of the war. The logistics of raw material supply demonstrated American abundance that contrasted sharply with German scarcity. Aluminum arrived in unlimited quantities from processing plants in the Pacific Northwest, while steel came from mills in Pennsylvania and Ohio. Electronic components flowed from suppliers across the industrial Midwest, assembled into sophisticated radio and navigation systems that gave American pilots decisive advantages in combat. Women comprised nearly half the workforce, their smallers, hands and careful attention to detail proving ideal for intricate assembly work. Many had husbands or brothers serving overseas, creating personal motivation that translated into extraordinary productivity and quality standards. Their shift supervisors were often retired aircraft mechanics or engineers who maintained strict requirements for precision and reliability. The contrast with German aircraft production was visible in every aspect of operations. While American factories operated with unlimited electrical power, German plants struggled with frequent blackouts and power rationing. American workers had access to the finest tools and machinery, while German production relied increasingly on obsolete equipment and improvised solutions. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Training programs for new workers could accommodate unlimited expansion as demand increased. Technical schools provided specialized instruction in aircraft manufacturing techniques, creating a skilled workforce that grew larger and more capable each month. German industry, meanwhile, relied increasingly on forced labor and inexperienced workers who could not maintain pre-war quality standards. The psychological impact of unlimited production was equally important. American workers understood that their efforts provided decisive advantages to pilots facing enemy fighters over Europe. Each rivet installed, each wire connected, and each component tested represented a contribution to overwhelming superiority that made Allied victory inevitable. Testing facilities adjacent to the factory complex evaluated each aircraft's performance before acceptance by military inspectors. Test pilots put every Thunderbolt through demanding flight profiles that verified engine performance, weapon systems, and structural integrity. Aircraft that met specifications proceeded immediately to training bases or overseas deployment. The sound of aircraft engines being tested provided constant background noise that reminded workers of their production's ultimate purpose. These were not abstract manufacturing targets, but instruments of war that would soon carry American pilots into combat against experienced enemy aviators determined to defend their homeland. As the shift ended, Doyle looked across the assembly floor at the latest batch of completed aircraft awaiting final inspection and delivery. While Germany bled machines, America built them faster than they could be destroyed. Empty aircraft hangars at German airfields told the story of systematic depletion more eloquently than any intelligence report. At Tempelhof Airfield outside Berlin, maintenance crews scavenged usable components from crashed Messerschmitt 109s and Focke-Wulf 190s, their tools scraping against twisted aluminum as they salvaged anything that might keep remaining aircraft operational for a few more sorties. The sound of their work echoed in cavernous hangars designed to house full squadrons, but now sheltering only a handful of aircraft in various stages of disrepair. Fuel stains on concrete floors marked the positions where dozens of fighters once stood ready for immediate deployment. Now those same spaces contained workbenches covered with salvaged parts that represented the last reserves of German air power. Young pilots, barely out of their teens, reported for duty, with logbooks showing fewer flying hours than American pilots accumulated in basic training. The Hitler Youth Aviation programs had been pressed into service as desperate attempts to replace casualties that exceeded Germany's ability to train qualified aircrew. Boys who should have been completing their education instead found themselves climbing into cockpits of high-performance fighters they barely understood. Fuel shortages had become so severe that training flights were virtually eliminated, leaving new pilots to learn combat flying during their first operational missions. The average life expectancy of German fighter pilots had dropped to a matter of weeks as inexperience combined with overwhelming enemy numerical superiority. Many never survived their initial combat encounters with hardened American veterans. The few remaining experienced pilots faced impossible odds each time they took off. Where German formations might assemble 8 or 10 aircraft, they encountered American fighter sweeps of 50 or 60 P-51 Mustangs, supported by unlimited fuel, ammunition, and replacement aircraft. The mathematical certainty of defeat was evident before engines started. Aircraft maintenance had deteriorated to crisis levels as spare parts became unavailable. Critical components were manufactured from inferior materials when standard alloys could not be obtained. Engine overhauls were postponed indefinitely, leading to mechanical failures during combat that proved as deadly as enemy gunfire. Quality control standards that had once made German aircraft legendary were abandoned in favor of quantity production that emphasized speed over reliability. The psychological impact on German air crews was devastating. Pilots who had once dominated European skies now faced missions with the knowledge that survival was unlikely and victory impossible. Radio communications during combat reflected growing desperation as squadron leaders called for reinforcements that did not exist and reported losses that could not be replaced. Ground crews worked with tools worn smooth by constant use and improvised solutions to problems that would have been simple to resolve with adequate supplies. Maintenance schedules that once ensured aircraft reliability were compressed into abbreviated inspections that missed critical problems. The professional pride that had characterized Luftwaffe technical support dissolved under the pressure of impossible demands and inadequate resources. Weather conditions that once provided tactical advantages now became additional sources of attrition. Aircraft forced to operate beyond normal maintenance intervals suffered failures during routine flights, adding to casualty lists that already exceeded sustainable levels. Emergency landings became standard procedures as engines failed and control systems malfunctioned. The sound of Allied bomber formations passing overhead had become as regular as sunrise, their engine noise serving as constant reminders of German helplessness to prevent strategic bombing of industrial targets. Anti-aircraft batteries fired. Sporadically, their ammunition rationed and their effectiveness reduced by worn gun barrels and inexperienced crews. They were not losing for lack of courage, they were losing for lack of everything. The skies over England thundered with the constant departure of bomber formations as Operation Point Blank reached full intensity from dozens of air bases across. The British Isles, streams of B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators lifted off in precise intervals, their four-engine roar shaking windows in nearby villages and creating a mechanical symphony that announced American industrial power made manifest. At Debden Airfield, ground crews serviced P-51 Mustangs with efficiency that reflected unlimited access to spare parts, fuel, and ammunition. Tool cribs stocked every component necessary for immediate repairs, while fuel trucks maintained constant circulation to keep aircraft ready for immediate deployment. The contrast with German operations was stark, where Luftwaffe mechanics scavenged parts from wrecked aircraft. American maintenance crews replaced entire engines as routine procedures. The logistics infrastructure supporting Allied air operations represented an industrial achievement unprecedented in military history. Over 450,000 trucks moved supplies across England and continental Europe, creating supply chains that delivered ammunition, fuel, food, and replacement equipment to forward bases with clockwork precision. Nothing was rationed, nothing was scarce, and nothing was improvised. Communications networks coordinated the movements of thousands of aircraft with radio systems that provided real-time weather updates, tactical intelligence, and navigation assistance. Flight leaders could communicate directly with bomber formations, escort fighters, and ground control stations throughout entire missions. German pilots, by contrast, often flew without radio contact and relied on hand signals for tactical coordination. Training facilities in the United States maintained production of qualified aircrew that matched the output of aircraft factories. Flight schools graduated pilots faster than combat losses could deplete operational squadrons, ensuring that American units maintained full strength with experienced personnel. The pipeline of replacement aircrew was so robust that entire squadrons could be reconstituted within weeks if necessary. Medical support for downed airmen included specialized rescue units equipped with dedicated aircraft and trained personnel. American pilots knew that mechanical failure or combat damage did not necessarily mean death or capture, as rescue operations could reach deep into enemy territory. German pilots facing similar situations had no hope of assistance and faced certain capture or death. Weather reconnaissance flights provided detailed meteorological data that allowed mission planners to optimize timing and routing for maximum effectiveness. American formations could avoid unfavorable conditions, while German defenders were forced to operate regardless of weather due to fuel shortages and limited aircraft availability. The psychological impact of unlimited abundance was evident in aircrew morale and combat effectiveness. American pilots flew with confidence that their equipment was superior, their training was comprehensive, and their support was unlimited. They understood that each mission was part of a larger campaign that would inevitably succeed through overwhelming application of industrial capacity. Intelligence-gathering operations provided detailed information about German defenses, aircraft locations, and operational capabilities. Photo reconnaissance flights mapped every enemy airfield, while communications intercepts revealed German planning and resource limitations. American commanders possessed complete situational awareness, while German leaders operated with fragmentary and often outdated information. Maintenance schedules for American aircraft exceeded German peacetime standards, ensuring that equipment performed at peak capability throughout extended operations. Preventive maintenance programs identified potential problems before they caused failures, while immediate replacement of worn components maintained fleet readiness at maximum levels. The sky was not just a battlefield, it was a conveyor belt of American abundance. American fighter tactics evolved rapidly as pilots and planners adapted to leverage their overwhelming material advantages. The big wing formation that had been tested during the Battle of Britain was refined into a flexible system that could deploy 60 or 80 fighters in coordinated sweeps ahead of bomber formations. These massive fighter formations sought out German interceptors and destroyed them before they could threaten the bombers they were meant to protect. Drop tank technology transformed the strategic equation by extending P-51 Mustang range to over 1,600 miles, allowing American fighters to escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back. The psychological impact on German defenders was devastating. No target remained beyond American reach, and no sanctuary existed where Luftwaffe fighters could regroup without facing immediate attack by superior numbers of better-equipped opponents. Precision targeting of German fuel production facilities reduced aviation gasoline output by 80% within 6 months of concentrated bombing. American intelligence had identified the critical bottlenecks in German fuel refining and transportation, allowing relatively small numbers of bombers to achieve strategic effects that crippled enemy air operations. Each gallon of aviation fuel denied to the Luftwaffe was more valuable than destroying individual aircraft. Radio communication protocols developed by American pilots allowed real-time coordination of complex tactical maneuvers during combat. Flight leaders could direct wingmen to specific targets while maintaining situational awareness of friendly and enemy aircraft throughout the engagement area. German pilots operating with inferior radio equipment and limited training could not match this level of tactical coordination. Gunnery training for American pilots emphasized precision shooting that maximized the effectiveness of limited ammunition loads. P-51 Mustangs carried 1,800 rounds for their .650 caliber machine guns, requiring pilots to make every burst count during extended engagements. Training programs included realistic combat simulations that prepared pilots for the deflection shooting necessary to hit maneuvering targets. Maintenance procedures were standardized across all American fighter units, allowing rapid replacement of pilots and aircraft between squadrons without lengthy familiarization periods. German pilots, by contrast, required extensive retraining when transferred between different aircraft types, limiting the flexibility of personnel assignments during critical periods. Intelligence analysis of German pilot training programs revealed the dramatic reduction in flight hours and combat preparation that left enemy aircrew vulnerable to systematic destruction. American planners deliberately sought engagement with inexperienced German pilots while avoiding encounters with the few remaining veterans who might pose genuine threats to Allied operations. Formation flying techniques maximized mutual support while maintaining aggressive tactical postures. American fighters operated in finger-four formations that provided overlapping fields of fire and mutual protection while allowing rapid response to changing tactical situations. These formations had been perfected through extensive training and combat experience that German pilots could not match. Navigation equipment in American aircraft included radio beacons and celestial navigation aids that allowed precise routing and timing throughout extended missions. Pilots could locate targets, rendezvous with bombers, and return to base regardless of weather conditions or combat damage to primary navigation instruments. The combination of superior equipment, extensive training, unlimited logistic support, and innovative tactics created synergistic effects that multiplied American advantages beyond simple numerical superiority. Each element reinforced the others to produce combat effectiveness that German defenders could not counter even under ideal conditions. With every sortie, the Luftwaffe was not just beaten, it was erased. The sterile conference room at the Pentagon displayed wall-mounted maps covered with red pins marking Luftwaffe losses across Europe. Each pin represented multiple aircraft, destroyed, pilots killed or captured, and irreplaceable resources eliminated from German defensive capability. The cumulative effect was visible at a glance. Vast areas of Germany where no effective air opposition remained to challenge Allied bomber formations. Statistical analysis prepared by the War Department revealed the mathematical certainty of complete German collapse. By May 1945, the Luftwaffe possessed fewer than 200 operational fighter aircraft, while American factories had produced over 300,000 military aircraft since Pearl Harbor. The production ratio exceeded 100 to 1, during peak periods representing industrial capacity that no enemy nation could match or counter. Daily loss reports confirmed that German pilot casualties exceeded replacement rates by factors of 10 or 20. Experienced aircrew who had survived the early years of the war were being killed faster than training programs could produce minimally qualified replacements. The few remaining veteran pilots faced impossible odds each time they took off, their survival measured in sorties rather than months or years. Fuel consumption analysis demonstrated the complete breakdown of German logistics infrastructure. Aviation gasoline production had fallen to less than 5% of peak wartime levels, grounding aircraft that might otherwise have been available for defensive missions. Pilots reported for duty knowing that fuel shortages might prevent takeoff even if operational aircraft were available. Intelligence assessments of German aircraft factories showed production levels that had collapsed under sustained Allied bombing. Facilities that once manufactured hundreds of fighters per month were producing fewer than a dozen, and those were often assembled from salvaged components with questionable reliability. Quality control had been abandoned in favor of quantity production that emphasized speed over performance. The strategic bombing campaign had achieved effects that exceeded the most optimistic pre-war projections. German industrial capacity was reduced to a fraction of peacetime levels, while transportation networks were so severely damaged that moving equipment and personnel between facilities became virtually impossible. American bomber formations operated with impunity over targets that would have been heavily defended just months earlier. Casualty ratios reflected the overwhelming technological and numerical advantages that American forces enjoyed throughout the final phase of the air war. For every Allied aircraft lost, German defenders suffered losses of 50, 100, or even 200 aircraft. These ratios were not sustainable for any military organization. Regardless of training or equipment quality, prisoner interrogation reports revealed the psychological impact of facing unlimited American resources. Captured German pilots described the hopelessness of engaging formations that seemed to grow larger after each encounter, supported by logistics that could replace losses overnight. Many expressed relief at being captured, rather than facing continued combat against impossible odds. Communication. Intercepts confirmed that German military leaders understood the mathematical inevitability of defeat. Unit commanders reported to higher headquarters that effective resistance was no longer possible and requested permission to surrender rather than sacrifice remaining personnel in futile gestures. The professional military assessment was unanimous. The war in the air was over. The final accounting was brutal in its simplicity. American industrial capacity had transformed unlimited raw materials into overwhelming military advantage that crushed enemy resistance through sheer abundance. No amount of individual courage or tactical skill could compensate for the material imbalance that Allied production had created. The numbers told the story. The Reich had been drowned in steel and fire. City of Cologne lay broken beneath silent skies, its Gothic cathedral standing like a blackened finger pointing accusingly at the heavens. Children played among the rubble of destroyed buildings, their laughter echoing strangely in streets where the roar of aircraft engines had once announced death from above. The absence of sound was as overwhelming as the previous thunder of bomber. Formations had been a silence that spoke of complete defeat and exhausted resistance. German civilians emerged from basements and air raid. Shelters to survey neighborhoods, transformed into moonscapes of shattered concrete and twisted steel. The systematic destruction of urban centers had eliminated not just military targets, but the infrastructure necessary to support modern civilization. Water systems, electrical grids, transportation networks, and communication facilities lay in ruins that would require years to rebuild. Former Luftwaffe pilots walked among the ruins with the hollow expressions of men who had witnessed the impossible, the complete negation of their professional expertise by overwhelming enemy capability. Many still wore their leather flight jackets, the only remnants of an air force that had once dominated European skies but had been systematically destroyed by American industrial might applied with relentless efficiency. The statistical evidence of defeat was visible everywhere. Aircraft factories had been reduced to empty shells, their production lines scattered across crater-marked landscapes. Railroad yards that once moved military supplies were graveyards of derailed cars and destroyed locomotives. Oil refineries that had once supplied aviation fuel were smoking ruins where nothing moved, except the occasional scavenging civilian, searching for usable materials, communication. Networks that had once coordinated defensive operations were silent. Their transmission towers toppled and their equipment rooms filled with debris. Military command posts operated from improvised facilities with hand-carried messages, replacing the sophisticated radio networks that had been eliminated by precision bombing. The apparatus of modern warfare had been systematically dismantled through the application of overwhelming force. Food distribution systems had collapsed as transportation. Infrastructure was destroyed, and agricultural areas were abandoned due to constant Allied air attacks. Civilians faced starvation in cities where warehouses stood empty and supply convoys could no longer operate safely. The indirect effects of strategic bombing proved as devastating as direct. Attacks on military targets, hospital facilities, struggled to treat casualties from the final months of aerial bombardment while lacking basic medical supplies, electrical power, and trained personnel. The wounded lay in makeshift facilities that lacked the resources to provide adequate care, their suffering multiplied by the breakdown of civilian services that had once supported urban populations. Educational institutions were either destroyed or converted to emergency housing for displaced civilians, whose homes had been eliminated by bombing campaigns. An entire generation of children had grown up knowing only air raid sirens, basement shelters, and the constant fear of death from above. Their normal development had been interrupted by a war that had consumed everything necessary for peaceful civilian life. Cultural institutions that had preserved centuries of German heritage lay in ruins alongside military installations and industrial facilities. Museums, libraries, theaters, and universities had been damaged or destroyed, their contents scattered or incinerated by the same forces that had eliminated military resistance. The bombing had targeted not just Germany's ability to wage war, but its capacity to maintain civilization. The psychological impact on surviving military personnel was evident in their willingness to surrender rather than continue futile resistance. Professional soldiers who understood the mathematical certainty of defeat saw no purpose in prolonging combat that could only increase casualties without affecting the inevitable outcome. The sky that once thundered with Messerschmitts now hung silent over broken cities. Years later, visitors to the Smithsonian Institution in Washington would stand before a gleaming P-51 Mustang displayed with reverent care in the Air and Space Museum. The aircraft's polished aluminum skin reflected museum lighting as schoolchildren read plaques describing the technical specifications that had once meant the difference between victory and defeat over European battlefields. The Mustang represented more than individual heroism. It embodied the marriage of democratic values and industrial capacity that had proven unstoppable when applied with determination and unlimited resources. Dawn. Gentile returned to civilian life, carrying memories of 15 minutes over Berlin that had demonstrated American air superiority with mathematical precision. His post-war career included speaking engagements where he described the tactical aspects of aerial combat, but always emphasized that individual pilot skill was meaningless without the industrial foundation that provided superior aircraft, unlimited fuel, and comprehensive support. Victory had required both courage and abundance. Mary Doyle transitioned from aircraft production to civilian manufacturing, her skills in precision assembly transferring easily to peacetime industry. She often reflected on the knowledge that every rivet she had installed in New York had contributed to overwhelming Allied air superiority over Europe. The statistical correlation between American production rates and battlefield success was direct and undeniable. Each hour of factory work had translated into measurable military advantage. Adolf Galland spent his remaining years analyzing the factors that had led to Luftwaffe defeat, writing extensively about the decisive role of industrial capacity in modern warfare. His professional assessment was blunt. German pilots had not lacked courage or skill, but they had been overwhelmed by an enemy nation that could produce aircraft faster than Germany could train pilots to fly them. Individual excellence was irrelevant when facing systematic abundance. The aircraft factories that had produced American air superiority became symbols of democratic industrial achievement. Republic Aviation, North American Aviation, and dozens of similar facilities had demonstrated that free societies could mobilize resources more effectively than totalitarian regimes. The competitive advantages of democratic capitalism had been proven in the most demanding possible circumstances: total war against determined enemies. Statistical analysis of wartime production revealed numbers that seemed impossible, even to those who had witnessed them. American factories had produced over 300,000 military aircraft between 1941 and 1945, compared to fewer than 120,000 for Germany during the same period. The ratio of productive capacity had been approximately 3-to-1 in America's favor, creating mathematical certainty of victory regardless of tactical considerations. Training programs that had prepared American aircrew were expanded in peacetime to support the aviation industry that emerged from wartime experience. Technical schools taught precision manufacturing techniques developed during aircraft production, while flight training programs provided the foundation for civilian aviation that connected American cities and eventually the world. The infrastructure of victory became the basis for peacetime prosperity. Technological innovations developed for military aircraft found immediate application in civilian aviation, transportation, and manufacturing. The precision required for combat aircraft translated into quality standards that made American products synonymous with reliability and performance. Industrial techniques pioneered in aircraft factories influenced production methods across dozens of civilian industries. The psychological legacy was equally important. American workers, engineers, and managers had proven that democratic societies could accomplish anything when properly motivated and organized. The confidence gained from industrial victory in World War II provided the foundation for post-war technological achievements that transformed global civilization. Museums, memorials, and historical societies preserved the equipment and documentation that told the story of American industrial triumph. Visitors could examine the actual aircraft, factory equipment, and production records that had made victory possible through overwhelming application of resources and systematic organization. 70 planes fell in 15 minutes, but the real victory was written in factories, in courage, and in the legacy of a nation that armed freedom with abundance. If you enjoyed the story I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy, please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it